in a prized position as a people to understand what it means to have to move, to have to leave, to seek asylum. We, as an island of peoples, should know that more than anywhere else. So the Irish government's response to these people in a very recent memory were to put up more army camps. So they were seen as a refugee problem. We see it as a refugee crisis. That's what we're told. Everybody gets into a panic, you know. 600 refugees were accommodated for a short time in the army training depot. Wouldn't it be lovely to live there? Can you imagine what it was like? Would you like to be there? We don't bring them to our nicest places. We don't put people in places that are of welcome, of comfort, despite the fact they're leaving in terror from somewhere. And at its peak, 1,695 people were being catered for by army personnel and 2,714 outside army centres. Some of you may remember this very clearly. You may have been around the places that these people had to go to. But we're not putting them into our prize hotels, the warmest rooms, the nicest places. And of course we have the deserving and the non-deserving refugees. So refugees are not always just frightened people who are thankful for assistance, because of course they should always be grateful. Given assistance, some of them can be very demanding, ungrateful, even obstreperous and fractious, as well as, particularly in the case of teenage boys, destructive. Look at the labels. If you left Derry or Belfast at that particular time, having been through what you were, would you be happy? Would you be calm and at peace with yourself and the world? But when people look for things, when people demand things, when people are looking for their rights or looking for something, we see them as destructive. We see them as demanding. We see them as not grateful. This is from the State Archives. You can look it up. It is there. And this was written about people coming from Northern Ireland. People the same as you and me. So we have a history. Now, today, Ireland's welcome, and we pride ourselves. Our tourist industry is full of Céad Míle Fáilte, green country, very welcoming. We want more tourists because that's what we depend on. Yet no, our actions say very differently about our welcome. Low refugees acceptance rates. We do not have a huge amount of refugees. Don't be caught to think we have welcomed in just under 4,000 refugees to the country. And in 2016, the International Protection Act meant that there was a single application procedure, which of course was at least a lot less paperwork for these people. But what it ends up doing is facilitating deportations, and I don't have the figures only for 2016 because I can't get the rest of them yet. Enforced deportations was 428, a rise from 215 in 2015. We deport people. More than 28,000 non-EU citizens were refused entry to present for international protection between 2008 and 2016. The International Protection Act facilitates the erosion of refugee family reunification rights. It's very difficult for people to bring their family members here. So we can say it breaks up families. We hear that echo from where? US. Who talks about laws breaking up families?
Trump.
Trump. But we're not like Trump. We're very like Trump. Impact on applicants already in the asylum process in relation to the availability of legal advice and sufficient time and resources to shorten their waiting time. They can be waiting for a very long time. And most of them are depending on translation, Most of them are depending on understanding their legal framework, which people can make a lot of money out of, but take advantage of the vulnerability state that people are in. So when we hear Lear Varadkar going over to the US talking about how he wants a different system for Irish people and for undocumented Irish people, we have to be very attentive. Why are we only looking for Irish people to have a right more than any other citizen or human beings in our world? Why is it that we do not say, we know, and we are looking for a different system for everybody to be able to look for asylum, refuge when they need it, acceptance of who they are. But no, we'll look for the Irish. And we know what it was like for people not to travel. I had a brother who couldn't come home for a very long time because he was undocumented in the US. So when somebody dies, when somebody gets sick, they cannot leave the country, they cannot go, because they won't get back. We know that reality. But it's as if it's something out there that we don't take to heart. And we don't apply it when we are looking at people asking the same things of us as we ask of others. So we have this thing called direct provision. Any of you familiar with direct provision? It's 20 years in existence, compounded by a desperate housing crisis and a homelessness crisis. But direct provision cuts people off from Irish society. People live desolate lives in it because they can't cook, they can't have privacy, they can't do very much when they are there. They only recently got the right to work. Their allowances is a pittance. But it's throughout the country, yet and all it is hidden from our view. It's like it's hidden in plain sight, a bit like trafficking and other issues. Poverty and immigration is returning to haunt Ireland's collective consciousness, yet we ignore the plight of people seeking refuge in our midst. We are in denial not of what we do not know, but of what we know only too well. Coming out of the history that we have come out of, and particularly when we talked about institutional abuse, all of the setups that people would say, gosh, if we had known it was like that, we would have done something about it. Isn't that correct? We know this is happening. But what is our response? Knowing doesn't change anything. Information doesn't make things different. If we thought it did, we would live in different ways. So what is needed to make things different? We have a very changing Ireland. An Ireland that's changing from it never was really homogeneous, but we pretended that it was, to one of diversity. In the 2017 I report, which is produced by ENAR, which is the European Network for Anti-Racism, which AMRI is a member, racism attacks were 256 incidents, including 23 assaults, 35 cases of ongoing harassment, and 113 of online speech. This is very small because most people do not report incidences of racism. And we have no legislation to protect people in this country who experience hate speech or racist attacks. And it's never lodged by the Gardaí as a racist attack. Because of course we're not racist in Ireland, are we? We don't really treat people of other faiths, traditions, colours, orientations differently. 75% of racist crime was committed by white Irish people, with 1/3 of discrimination cases relating to the public sector staff. And we have evidence to show that, but it's very minimal to what is experienced by a lot of the people that we know. And it is a major challenge for us. But we have very short memories as a nation. We don't remember that this was what greeted Irish people in London and in Boston, in Chicago, Philadelphia, and other places we went. So we are really being challenged to the core of who we are, to either go from having what we call, Pope Francis calls, the globalization of indifference. Can you see the picture?
Mm-hmm.
What do you see in the picture?
The golf course and the
Golf
refugees
course.
on top of the
And what?
Security fence.
the refugees
Soldiers.
trying to
People
climb
trying
over.
Climb over the...
Mm.
And do you think the people playing golf are very disturbed?
No.
Mm-hmm.
Pope Francis in Lampedusa, do you remember when he was became Pope? And the first place he went to was Lampedusa. Why did he go to Lampedusa?
All the
Refugees there.
refugees were
The refugees there.
arriving in
It was the entry point at that stage for most of the refugees to Italy. Why do you think he went there?
That was a priority in his pontificate. He also came, his family went.
He was an immigrant. His family were immigrated from Italy to where?
Argentina.
Argentina, for the same reason. So that's why he knows something of this reality. So he said the culture of comfort, which makes us think only of ourselves, makes us insensitive to the cries of other people, makes us live in soap bubbles which, however lovely, are insubstantial. They offer a fleeting and empty illusion which results in indifference to others. Indeed, it even leads to the globalization of indifference. And I believe that. I believe we have become very indifferent. We've become numb to the realities around us, because if we really felt passionately about it, and if we saw each other as a valued human being, we would be incensed by what is happening. And we would not accept the way people are being treated. So change is needed, and who's going to do it? We can't leave it to somebody else. As people of faith, we are supposed to be moved by our love of God, whoever we see God to be, and love of neighbour. In the parable of the Good Samaritan, do you know the parable of the Good Samaritan? What was the challenge in the parable of the Good Samaritan? What was the question? What was the question?
Who's my neighbor?
Who's my neighbour? Who was the neighbour?
Stranger.
Hmm?
Stranger.
The stranger. Who was the neighbour?
The woman looked after him.
Were you told? Were you given a list? The neighbour had to be a Jewish person who went to the synagogue, who observed all the faith, who did everything correct. Was that who the neighbour was?
The one in need.
The neighbour was
The one in
always
need.
the other who was different to you. The person who fell among thieves and was robbed was what? Who came to their aid? A Samaritan. And a Samaritan was the other, not the most common, was the other. And not only were they the other, they were the most unexpected person to be told in the story that Jesus was telling to the people who were listening, like you are today, listening to me. So they knew the story, they knew what Jesus was saying. So the most unexpected person who showed love of neighbour was the other who's different to you or I. And the other teaches us